Hello. We're going to talk about pride, LGBT, and the effect Jezebel has had on the world. Because it's terrible. So, to start, does the Bible say being gay is wrong? Yeah, it definitely does. It's not just in Leviticus. You can look in Second Corinthians. And actually, the passage in Second Corinthians also says, "But some of you once were like this. Now you have changed. You have come to Christ." So it also debunks the idea that you are born with a certain sexuality. Um, that's a completely false claim. You're born with no sexuality as a child. Usually. There are some cases where they've been exposed to certain things and all of a sudden they have a sexuality, and if they do, you know what that means? That we have failed the innocence of that child. And you know the people who do that? Jesus says they should be thrown into the bottom of a lake with a milestone. That's what pedophiles and people like that deserve. But you're being no better than a pedophile by trying to teach these kids about these things way too early. I mean, sure, is it wrong to teach these people about the awareness of people with different sexualities, different identities? No, there's nothing wrong with that. The more one knows, the better. But there's a certain age that should come with it. Because you trying to indoctrinate kids in elementary school is just like a pedophile going after the kids. The only difference is the way you teach it's with words, and the way the pedophile teaches it with actions. Still just teaching the wrong thing, you're breaking the innocence of childhood. And that is terrible. And the fact that we got to this point goes to show the impact Jezebel already had. Now, before Revelation was written, people knew the Antichrist and the false prophet when it came to end times prophecies. But Revelation has a call out for the Jezebel spirit as well. So it's not just the Antichrist spirit, it's not just the false prophet spirit, it's not just the Holy Spirit, God and Satan. Jezebel's also in there. And lust itself is one of the most evil sins. It takes hormones, things you naturally have, and it twists them. It is an addiction. And to say that you're born this way, that you can't change, is like some guy smoking crack saying, oh, he was born to smoke crack, he's going to continue smoking crack. The idea is, through Christ, you can do all things, including getting out of that sin. Now, we as the church should be accepting to these people, not accepting of their false belief, but accepting in the fact that we still love everybody. We still try to be the hands and feet to everybody, because if we don't, then we're discriminating. But it's not discriminating to take out a speck in your brother's eye if there's not a log in your own eye. In fact, even if it was a log in your own eye, the only thing it is hypocrisy. And that's not discrimination. Discrimination is slamming the door on somebody just because they're a certain way. And I will never do that. You know, my brother, he's in the LGBT community. My mother's in the LGBT community. Do I wish they wouldn't seek that ways and they could find a lot, more peace and better life with Jesus? Yes. But I can't hate them because of a choice. You can never hate the sinner. You can only hate the sin. Because you know who hates the sinner? Satan. That's the reason why he made you sin. In fact, any evil spirit, Jezebel, Antichrist spirit, false prophet spirit, Satan, demons, whatever it may be, they want to bring confusion, delusion, lies, because how else are you supposed to convince a human being to go to hell? Like, if there's somebody with enough self-loathing out there and enough humility, maybe. But then there's also Jesus, who shows that there's a way to be forgiven and redeemed. And so Satan has to secretly get you thinking that you are in the right, that you are doing the morally right thing, when in reality you are walking on the wide path of destruction. And I've had a decade-long battle with the Jezebel spirit itself. It tried to get me when I was as young as a fourth grader. That's when some of the temptations started. And yes, at first, as a little kid, I didn't know. I knew about the commandment about adultery, but I didn't read the Sermon on the Mount where it says even looking lust flees a sin. And so Jezebel broke my innocence, and in so got me on an addiction of sin and lust. And it took me years to break that. Years of knowing it was wrong, having convicting thoughts every night, every time I did it, and it took years. But there was a period in my sin when I said to the Lord that I wanted a year alone. No more God talking to me, no more Christian influence, just a chance to see what it's like to be a normal worldly person. And in doing so, not caring about the sin amplified it. For instance, my mom and my brother, yeah, do they sleep around with people of the same gender? No, but they identify with that community and they don't believe it's a sin. And in doing so, they commit a lot of other sins without even knowing it. And now, again, like I said, the narrow road isn't about not sinning or not being legalistic. It's about following Christ. And since Christ never did such a thing, we as the church should never do such a thing. And through propaganda and through manipulation, the idea of pride when it comes to sexuality and LGBT stuff has corrupted our worldview. Best example in history I can think that would be equivalent is eugenics. Because, Hitler and all the other Nazis in power, they were studying eugenics, but they knew it was completely morally wrong. But how do you get an entire nation of people to side with you? Through propaganda, through lies, through manipulation. And so, with pride in America, we started seeing a gay person on a TV show, and it was uncomfortable at first. It really was. And there's a saying that if you tell a lie enough times, somebody will accept it as the truth. And that's what happened over time. America is being, the normal people, the people out there who don't follow these ways, who think it's uncomfortable, who think it's wrong, were blasted with LGBT propaganda, whether it was through an ad, a TV show, a pride rally, whatever the case is. And this is prophesized in the Bible, end time stuff. The fact that we live in a day and age where evil is good and good is square is completely wrong. And it's to the point where some Christians are afraid to speak on this issue because they want to be loving. They want to try to get people to come to Christ, but we cannot use the same tactics. We must give them the truth if they're of age. If they're innocent enough, then you don't necessarily need to spit out all the facts unless it's already happened to them, but by, for example, the American education system. And so at that point, you might as well tell them the truth of everything. But this desensitization to pride movements has allowed it to actually become a debate when it was something that was undebated. Again, eugenics. We as America, we didn't debate on it. We didn't think it was good in any way, shape, or form. You should never trying to be studying the races, trying to create the best super race. That's wrong. And just as that's wrong, going against the order of nature with adaptions, diversity in genetics and stuff like that. It's the same thing with LGBT. It's against the natural order. It's why you don't see it in nature. Now, there are cases where maybe like a male dog will hump a male dog, but that's not for sexual pleasure. That's usually for domination or whatever the heck, the dogs do. They're a very, pack-based creature, and so that part of it's showing your superiority, your alphaness to it. But we as humans, we have something the rest of nature does not. We have the awareness of our instincts. We have the awareness of our moral decisions. But when you have propaganda, that awareness slowly fades away. And so now we live in an age where churches are raising up pride flags, trying to say, oh, love is love. Love is not love, all right? Love is God, and God is love. And if it's not from God, then it's not love. It's point blank, period. It doesn't matter. Because everything that comes from God is good and loving. And everything that doesn't come from God is either from Satan or from the free will of a sinner. And so, I ask you, Christian Americans, don't be desensitized. Don't buy into the propaganda. You're going to end up being like a German citizen in the 1940s. Sure, it'll get you some temporary blessings of like a Volkswagen for everybody, payments for having like more than 6 children. But in the end, when you see the truth, because the truth always comes out, it's going to devastate you. I couldn't imagine how devastating it was for the average German who had no idea of concentration camps when they see leaked footage from like Auschwitz or other concentration camps out there, the atrocities of which they were hiding through propaganda. And these are atrocities that are going on as well in the LGBT. Because, again, like I said earlier, trying to teach this to children is as bad as pedophiles fucking children. Literally no difference. The child is still getting a hold of an idea they should not necessarily yet. Because the child is supposed to be innocent, so they can have that joy, so they can have that image of God in them, so they can have a good and loving heart. But when you expose them to everything, when you expose them to things that are broken like, LGBT, then all of a sudden, that child is becoming cold. They're becoming desensitized. Then some of them are becoming confused. If it weren't for all this education about LGBT, you wouldn't have a lot of kids questioning if they're a boy or a girl, or if they're in the boys or girls. It wouldn't be a question in the child's mind. When I was a kid, before Jezebel tried to get to me, I never thought that way. And even then, as a kid, I thought it was very weird. And I thought, I can never tell a single soul about this. And so for years, I hid that sin. And that is like the idea of a person being trapped in a closet. Because if it was never wrong, you would have never put yourself in the closet. Because you wouldn't have a need to hide it. It says about the fruits of the Spirit that there are no laws against these: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, and self-control. There is no law against those. When somebody acts in any of the fruits of the Spirit, they don't have a reason to go hide in a closet, hide from the world. Because there is nothing against it. And the fact that they gone into the closet at one point and then came out of the closet goes to show that at some point they had some conviction, but then they got desensitized to their morals, and all of a sudden they're cool with coming out. Now, if anybody is in the closet, come out. Because hiding in a closet, lying about temptations that you face, desires that you have, and not having that ability to share it with the community that loves you is going to eat at your soul. Guilt will eat you up. Because even if we're not sure the exact rules or laws in the Bible against such, things like, LGBT, we know at heart, because of the image of God, that there is something morally wrong about it, something twisted. You may not necessarily be able to put a finger on it, but from somebody who's seen a lot of it in his life and somebody who's done a little bit of research out there, I can see more of that issue. And so there is a difference between accepting somebody into the church and accepting false doctrine. And that's what we as Christians need to realize. Because if we don't, then the church is going to end up being like the streets of Rome. When the reformers were around. And another thing I'd like to talk about real quick, and this is going to be short and sweet. It's going to be about abortions. Abortion, in a way, is child sacrifice. Sorry to say it, but if you are aborting a baby to go into stem cell research to help others, that is a sacrifice. That is literally the definition of a sacrifice. The payment of one's life or wealth or whatever they have to compromise in order for be able to help others. And we as Christians cannot stand up to belief, it's my body, it's my right. Okay, if you want to play it that way, it's my body and my right. I can go ahead and start eating at my leg real quick. It's my body. You totally wouldn't, check me into a mental institution if I start eating at my leg, because it's my body, my rights. And the same thing goes on for abortion. Now, I believe there could be a gray area in this, that maybe abortion might be the wrong choice, in the sense that, in the case of rape. But we also have, adoption centers and places like that. Now, given they're morally corrupt in their own ways, but it is better than taking the chance of life. And I know from, my wife, that I've asked her about it, and she said, even if it was my life in danger, I'm going to lay down my life to make sure my child comes into the world. And do I think it's the greatest thing for a child to come into a world without a parent? Not necessarily. But, you can bring in somebody else. You can bring in a step parent. There's nothing in the Bible against that. In fact, helping the widowed, helping the orphaned should be what we do as Christians. But if you want an example of what happens when abortion becomes a commonly accepted thing, look to early Rome. The amount of sex and drugs that were in the city at night. There was some guy from one of the North African kingdoms at the time of Rome, and he went into Rome, guilty as heck for a crime. I don't necessarily remember it off the top of my head, but he walks out of there guilt-free because he had a lot of money. And he just walks out of the city saying, in Rome you can buy anything. And it was very corrupt. And, the fact that you could just buy anything means you could literally just buy sex, buy drugs, buy your enjoyment. And you don't even have to take care of the children, because a lot of the time in early Rome, they would abort the children. And that is the whole, like, one of the biggest factors. That evil is one of the biggest factors to why Christianity conquered Rome. Because, like I said in an earlier video, as they kept aborting the babies and they kept doing sex and drugs and not taking care of their families, the other way, my bad. The Christians followed the moral ways, loved their families, kept spreading the gospel, and all of a sudden the numbers grew. And so, as a person who believes in untouched free will, with gospel and conviction being what turns a person, we shouldn't necessarily discriminate or go after people in the LGBT community or people that support abortion. But what we should do is we shouldn't have them in our church if they continue in their ways, because then that would be a blasphemy to the Holy Spirit. And that would be false doctrine being spread in the church, and if you allow that, then you're a false teacher. And then let their free wills and their sin determine their fate. Because we can try to spread the truth, to put logic and reason onto things, but some people are ignorant in their ways. Some people won't change unless change is brought to them. And it is the Lord's job to do that. Vengeance is the Lord's. And so if they continue to live in that way, let them fall. Let them fall. Now, we as a nation, we should be able to provide the basic human rights. The ones that John Locke talked about, life, liberty, and property. And I would like to add a fourth right onto that, which is love. And so, if we do that, it would be the morally right way to go about this change. And one more thing. Gay marriage. It shouldn't be allowed. Simply for one reason. Marriage is the church's. Marriage belongs to the church. Partnership belongs to the state. Because marriage is more than just living together, sharing bank accounts, providing for one in health and sickness. It is about learning the love of God through spreading as much love as you can to that one person, caring as much as you can for that one person, raising a family together and being able to show your love to the children. That is what a marriage is for. And if they want marriage, they ought to be Christian, because marriage is a solely Christian value. Now, the on-paper legal part of marriage should still be allowed. That's what we should call partnership. And in that sense, it shouldn't be different legally, so that they still have their human natural rights. But just because they have their natural rights, just because it's our job to give those, doesn't mean it's our job to accept their false doctrine. Because we know, the ones who said no to a decision like that, know that it is a wide path of destruction. You cannot be on the narrow path if you're on the wide path. So we will stay on the narrow path. We will follow Christ. If you want, you can come along. You just got to leave everything behind that was on the wide path. Because at the end of the wide path is a gate, and at the end of the narrow path is a gate. The gate to the narrow path is very thin. You don't have a lot you can really bring through the gate. In fact, the only thing you can bring through the gate is your soul, because the gate is from earth to heaven. You can't expect to go on the wide path. Bring all your clutter, all your flesh, all your sin. It makes you too wide to enter through that narrow gate one day. And as Christians, we can live heaven now. We can have heaven on earth. And that's what we get when we walk the narrow path. And so if you had the ears to hear this harsh truth, this controversial truth, that's a blessing. And if you have an issue with controversy, you clearly haven't met my Lord, because he was quite controversial. But anyway, be the hands and feet of Jesus. Have a blessed day.